Hey, and good evening. This is Tiger. Sorry for this blotched start. Somehow things were weird in my OBS. AJ, good evening to you. Good evening, she says. Well, somehow on my PC it always takes a bit longer. The box of old matches is to get to 8 o'clock Central European Time, 7 p.m. UTC. Akura, moin and hello, happy new year to you guys. Great to have you back on the stream for the third video in the trilogy about New Jersey Transit. We had signaling, we had the safety systems in terms of the coded cap signals or continuous cap signals, and now we do the missing part. What is the ASES II system on New Jersey Transit territory, typically without the C? So it's not called access, but ASES II, traditionally in the New Jersey Transit lines. And for that, we're gonna drive a service on the Arrow III from Dover to Hoboken Terminal. That is a non-revenue service. And I will have custom weather because I don't want fog and everything. Also, I want some light until the end of the service. Snow level is obviously not something that we want in our precipitation. We don't either. Today we just run nicely on the Arrow III and go through a presentation about the ASES II system that is very, very close to the ASES II system that we have already discussed for the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority streams, Boston Worcester, with some tiny differences. And well, the biggest differences that we can see is that they use a different display unit. There are a list more of different, or a little list of differences, but most of them is so that you don't really see that in the game, and not even in real life, most probably. X62 Dover to Hoboken, a non-revenue service. That means we're not stopping, we're just taking the empty train from Dover to Hoboken, and I thought it is actually a nice idea to use a train that runs through so that we can actually see all the speed limits that are typically connected with stations where we would stop, so that we don't run into those speed restrictions anyway. Let's drive a bit until we are at, let's say, Morristown or Convent or something there, and then have the presentation and then get the train home. Before we start, let's turn on all the relevant markers. That would be like the DLC marker. We are running in the Morristown line. The disclaimer that I got as an ambassador game keys for free from DTG, with all the relevant caveats that come with it. One caveat that I don't need to make is that I am not singing DTG's song. What I tell you, what I like and what I don't. Honestly, as always, without being brutal. And yeah, I can tell you one thing. What I don't like is the ATC and ASES tutorial that comes with the New Jersey Transit line, with the Morristown line. I did not really like the one that they put into Boston Worcester. And here, well, I appreciate that they put in a tutorial for it, but if you can actually understand what those systems are doing from what the tutorial tells you, then, well, I take my hat off to you. I would not be able to understand anything from that. But anyway, let's hear the brake pipes hissing. Our little Arrow III train is standing here waiting to be allowed on the route. What we need to do is to switch on the alerter control. The fuse is already on. The cutout switch is to be cut in, and then PTC system turns on ATC as well as the ASES II system. And the ASES II system, when the New Jersey Transit trains travel on Amtrak territory, they actually process the ASES system that is running there. So no big deal in the difference, but nevertheless. Two different type approvals by the FRA, so two different system, and well, this unique ray of light, circle of light, bar of light, speed display unit that New Jersey Transit likes to use. Now our service started. We can't go yet because we still have a red signal. Now it's switched to a medium clear. As it looks, turns into an approach limited on our cab signaling system. How those signals translate, we have talked about this in one of the previous videos, especially the one about the ATC. Going across the switch for what reason ever, because after the station we're going back to the other side of the track. But why not? There was a beep telling us that actually the track limit improved, so that we can now make use of the full 45 that the approach limited cab signal aspect allows us. Limited clear at the signal. That means we're going across a 45 switch. This conforms with the 45 from the cab signal aspect. And the track speed limit is at least not below that. Beep beep, two beeps. One for the improving ATC cab speed aspect, and the other one for the improving aspect. For the improving track speed aspect that we got from the ASES system. And why two beeps so close to each other? Because we're actually passing not only a section boundary between two different track circuits. What you can see from those impedance bonds here, those silver plates more or less mark the impedance bonds, and at those joints you typically can expect to get a different cab signal aspect. Cab signal aspect can improve also in between, but here on those joints you can get into a different track circuit that can carry a different aspect. So downgrading typically happens on those points where the impedance bonds are, and then here we are with our transponders, the track-mounted passive transponders, as they are called in the ASES II system description. We would call them ASES transponders, access balises in different systems, and those are typically painted yellow and come in pairs. Sometimes, and this is actually a specific of the ASES II system, is that you sometimes can have a single one of those balises if they only there to re-establish the location of the train. That is not used in that way in the ASES system, but in the ASES system, according to the description that I read in the PTC implementation and development plan for the ASES II system. It can. So, silver thingies are typically for separating the track circuits so that you can have different ATC cap aspects, and the yellow transponders for the ASES II system. Here again, you can see at this point you even have 3 ASES II transponders. The impedance bonds with the silver plates typically come only in pairs. Now we've got a line speed of 55 and a high green on the cap signaling aspect. Cap signaling lets us go maximum authorized speed, and that is the track speed here, what is 50, 55 even. At the end of the straight that comes after this bend, we have to drop to 50. We will see it on the ASES system as long as we are actually hitting the brake profile and are still faster than the target speed. We can see the circle of light shrink. If we are already below... No, I don't want to do that. If we are already below the target speed, here you can see it shrink to the new target speed. If we are already below, then we only have to acknowledge it, and we would not see it shrink, but it will just drop down. Now for these bends with 50. After the bend, we can expect an increase to 60. The increase happening instantaneously. And then it is still the driver's responsibility to account for the train traveling its own length before accelerating. What is stated is explicitly in the, I think the development plan it is, in the system description, that the driver has to know the speed limits, and the ASES II system only enforces those. It's not a guidance system, it's only an enforcement system. So, increase to 60, we still have to travel the train's length before we can actually accelerate to 60. And the next drop to line speed 30 we won't see, because we most probably get interfering, a restricting cap signal aspect here from the approach limited. That puts us immediately into overspeed. And we have to put our brakes into suppression. Until we are below the 45. That is connected with the approach limited. Next signal will be the one that is always not better than approach. It's this signal that can show an approach yellow aspect together with a clear to next interlocking C indicator. What is a funny anomaly. But this is because the approach signal here is used and had been used before the ASES II system to enforce a speed limit of 30. Here the other line, the Mount Clair line I think it is called. Yeah, the Mount Clair Boontown line connects with our Morristown line. Next stop would be that funny one at Mount Tabor. The one where you have only one platform on the left side when we're traveling that way. And if we're stopping in this direction, then people actually have to cross the tracks to get to the train. Can see the impedance bonds even from here, and as soon as we hit the impedance bonds we got a better cap signal, allowing us now to go back to line speed, and the line speed also increased to 50. Did someone say Tabor? Yes, I did say Tabor. Mount Tabor. Tabor. And this is to demonstrate what happens if you don't comply with the access limits. That drops to 40 at this point. You get this really spacey sound, and then you have to get the brakes into the suppression setting. It's not enough to get like 70 or 80%, but into suppression. Acknowledge it, and then you can perform a running release of the penalty brake that we just got. Speed limit will increase to 60 again, I think, and then drop to 50 later. And CDRajdar says he was in Tabor on Monday. That is so great. Let's see how far we are away from the 50 drop. It's actually quite close. Next break. This beep tells us that we are approaching, we're hitting the brake profile. And so you can actually stay underneath if you know that you're actually approaching the speed limit, and you don't get this spacey alarm that is connected with the overspeed condition. Not this Tabor, not in Tabor, not at Mount Tabor, obviously. No, the real Tabor. So let's see what the speed profile looks like. We're going 60 through Morristown. Past Morristown we will have an increase to 70. Unless we get adverse signals or temporary speed restrictions. What is obviously also possible. It's most probably Morristown Plains here. It's we're getting to Morristown. And Akura, sorry, did I miss which train we are in? Is that one built by Hitachi? No, this is built by Bombardier, right? No, it's a GE train, the Arrow III. It's not a Bombardier built train, if I'm not mistaken. I think it is built by General Electric. But don't quote me necessarily on that. But I looked it up when we were presenting the trains in World 6. It is a beautiful Arrow III EMU. And I thought it is a GE train. But we have to look this up to make it sure. High green. When passing Morristown. Limit to 50 for passing Morristown. I didn't anticipate it. This is why I had to beat a bit hard on the brakes and drop below the 50. But it is possible if actually you get jumped by ASES and this beep, a bit lower tone, announces that a speed restriction is imminent, you can still make it by putting your brakes to about 70%. And then you should actually be able to glide down the brake profile without getting an alarm and a penalty brake. Now we can accelerate to 60, as we can see, and before we get to Convent, we actually can even accelerate to 70, but when driving down towards Maplewood from Convent station, then we have to slow down to 60 and 50 again. Increase to 70, 50, 60, 70, all those speed limits cannot be shown by the cab signaling aspect system alone. We need the ASES system for that. And I think when passing Convent station, like now, I will cut in the presentation without a stop this time, because there is no stop in this non-revenue service. New Jersey Transit presentation. New Jersey Transit Safety Systems. Just to recap, to check if the engineer is present and active, we have the alerter as a vigilance device. If you don't operate any relevant controls and don't reset it by pressing the alerter reset button, you sometimes get an indicator on some trains. On some trains you get an alarm directly, and if you don't push your button, then you can get a penalty brake. That is what we find on almost every American train, even those that do not have more sophisticated safety systems. If we want the system to check if the engineer is reacting to the signals that translate into cab signals, we have the CCS or ATC system, continuous cab signals, automatic train control. That requires that the driver or engineer manages the speed accordingly, acknowledges decreases in signal aspects, and put the brakes to suppression if the train is actually traveling faster than the signal aspect allows. It can alarm if we get into an overspeed situation and apply a penalty brake if we don't get enough, or we don't get the brakes into suppression fast enough. There is a video about this system, CCS ATC, on the New Jersey Transit line. Last video that we had on this line. It is not so different, not so much different from the ATC system that the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority, the MBTA, is using on the Boston Worcester line, for example, or also on other lines around Boston, but in its special implementation for New Jersey Transit, and they choose to call it CCS for continuous cab signals and not so much automatic train control. Both is pulse code cab signaling track circuits. The track circuits carry the codes typically on 100 and 250 hertz frequencies, and the cab signal aspects are connected with that. That was good for decades until the Congress required railroad carriers to implement positive train control, especially two things. Line speed limits were not controlled by automatic train control systems, and you could not ensure a positive train stop. You could not stop the train and prevent it from passing a signal at the danger or run into work crews, and those things needed to be implemented in a positive train control system. And so as an overlay to the CCS ATC system, many railroad carriers on or around the Northeast Corridor implemented an ASES system, speed control system that relies especially on track-mounted transponders and additionally, or in some aspects, parallel radio-controlled signals for the positive train stop especially, and for the temporary speed restrictions. And that is here on New Jersey Transit, as far as their own lines are concerned, the ASES system, the Advanced Speed Enforcement System. When they run around on Amtrak lines like between New York Penn and Kearny Junction, then they just process the access to wayside installations that Amtrak put there. So most locomotives can actually process both systems. In the type approval in the beginning and also in the development plan, it says that both systems are similar in design and function, with some minor differences. But nevertheless, it is a system that has its own type approval by the FRA, and so may be treated as a different system compared to the ASES system run by Amtrak or run by MBTA. Obviously, also managed speed acknowledge if you have a decrease in the civil speed, and put the brakes into suppression if the train is too fast. Otherwise, you get an alarm and a penalty brake if the alarm is not enough. And the ASES system or ASES system can also provide a positive train stop. It can stop the train in front of a danger point, be it a red signal, be it a work crew, be it a malfunctioning level crossing, or anything like that. And this is something that cannot be accomplished with pulse code cap signaling. It needs to be put on top of it as an overlay system. And this part we will look at in this video. The signaling itself we have discussed in a different video. The ATC CCSS part we have discussed in a video. And now let's look at the ASES system. So this is our situation that we have from the pulse code cap signaling train picking up the pulse code that is sent in the rails with the cap signaling machinery, and now the overlay for the ASES, the Advanced Speed Enforcement System. Unique to this ASES system in New Jersey Transit is this type of display unit with the circle of light, with those buttons. In the earlier versions it also had a keypad and even more indicators. What actually happened to them, I'm not entirely sure. What we don't need for the ASES part is the ADU, the aspect display unit. This is only connected with the CSS or ATC part. If it is activated, you typically get the message whether you are rated as a passenger or a freight train and whether those systems are active. The CSS is the cap signaling system with enforcement cap signaling system, or continuous cap signal. Sometimes it is called CCS, sometimes it is called CSS. This is the cap signaling system, and SES is the speed enforcement system. May it be advanced or not. And what can the ASES system do? It can enforce permanent speed restrictions, line speeds, civil speeds, or it can enforce temporary speed restrictions, what is a thing that can also not be enforced by the cap signaling alone. It can provide a positive train stop. What it cannot do is regulate traffic. Train separation is something that needs to be done with the signals, with the ATC, so that if you run too close to a different train in this permissive block system, then you get restricting signals. And routing is a thing that is often done by the cab signaling system already, but it can also be done by the ASES system. We will get back to this, how this is performed. So, a very versatile system that can do a lot. What does it do? It uses transponders like those yellow thingies here that get activated by a sweep frequency that the train sends, and then it sends back whatever is coded into those transponders. The information typically about the upcoming speed limits, about the gradients, about the distance until you get the next pair of transponders, and so on. We know that from ETCS level 1, we know that from other ASES implementations, and even from the Swiss SATE SI 127 train guard system. Obviously, we need some device that can activate those transponders and read it. And additionally, we have radio communication between the wayside installations, the office segment, and the locomotive. So it's a constant data connection, also wireless on a radio network that can send additional information, but the main stock is those transponders, so that you are not limited to radio connectivity. We have already seen how the circle of light works. It just shows you how fast you can go by, well, depicting a green bar that ends at a certain number on your speed clock. And other than the cab signaling system that is limited to certain steps, like 20 for restricting, 30 for approach, 45 for approach limited, and then more or less the high green aspect for maximum authorized speed, we can now have all possible speeds, sometimes limited to increments of 5 miles per hour that we need. We can have 55, we can have 35, what is not a speed step in any kind of cab signaling system. We can also show the 15, what we cannot show with the 20 restricting, for example. So this is where the stuff happens. Unlike the machines that are used on the locomotives in Boston Worcester, for example, we don't have two halves, we don't have two different indications for what speed is the relevant speed, but we only have one indication on the speed clock to not confuse things. And what we also don't see on this kind of speed display unit, we don't see whether the limit originates from the ATC, from the cab signals, or whether it originates from the ASES system. So it is not so that one of those two systems is highlighted or framed or whatever. At least in the implementation in the game, you can only guess by what is happening whether the limit that you are shown at the moment comes from the ASES system or from the ATC. Different on the locomotives from the Boston Worcester. There you have two lights, and the respective light is lit so that you can see whether you are running on an ATC limit or an ASES limit. In the tutorial, it tells you, it claims that you can see which limit is active, but I have not been able to figure it out according from this indication here. I also don't know if this is prototypical or not. It's hard to find any information about this. So if anyone is actually running trains of this sort for New Jersey Transit, this would be super interesting to know how this is done and whether this kind of behavior in the system is prototypical or not. The deluxe locomotive that came with TrainSim World 6, the ALP45 dual power, does not use this kind of speed display unit. We have talked about this in the last video, but it uses the same kind of aspect display unit that is also used on the Boston lines, on the MBTA lines on the locomotives there. The F40 and the other locomotives there and the cab cars that you can run there. You have this with the balloons. We've discussed this shortly in the video on the ATC. I won't get back to this in this video here. So if you want to know how the ASES system is used on the ALP45DP, then I would refer you to the video of about the Boston-Worcester line, where we have looked at this in depth. And it would be also interesting to know if there had been a change in philosophy with New Jersey Transit, that with the newer locomotives that they got, they switched their SDUs for ADUs of the more common style that is used also by the MBTA, or whether this is just a quirk elsewhere. So I have not found out what story is behind this, that the ALP45DP does use a totally different display unit. How does this system work? What are the components of the ASES II system? If you have learned about the ETCS system in Europe or the ASES systems that are that we have discussed in videos before, then you will see a lot of common things that both systems use. Sometimes the names are a bit different, and some little thingies are also different. So this is our train, this is our track, this is our engineer, and this is our signal. Here signaling a restricted signal, and in ideal times the engineer would always comply with what the signal tells her and slow down the train accordingly. To make it more safe, we want some technical installations to enforce this behavior in case that for some reason, willingly or not willingly, the engineer does not comply with the order that they get from the signal. So the first thing that we have, the ATC system, the coded cab signals, the code that is sent, or in case of a restricting signal not sent to the train, is picked up by the cab signaling system and shown to the engineer on the display unit. Here on the left, the aspect display unit, so that they know what they have to do. But this is not really enforcing. We cannot connect the enforcement system with that. The speed limit that is connected with this aspect may not be superseded, so that we can have some sort of enforcement here. To get it more sophisticated, we build more technical stuff to our signals. The signals are now connected with wayside interface units that can process the information that is given by the signal and by the pulse code into a network that can then further process it. There is, at least at every interlocking or every post that is fitted with a wayside interface unit, at least one base radio control module that can connect those units into a radio network, and that applies to signal controllers, interlocking controllers, switched circuit controllers, track circuits, and so on. And if you have more of them, then you can also have a unit that is called a BCM, a base communications manager. That always is there if you have more than one wayside interface unit in a specific place. Also, there can be more. It's not only radio connected, but it is also hardwired here in an Ethernet-based communications infrastructure that connects with the core server in the office compartment. Excuse me, my dog is just trying to destroy the couch. Be nice, okay? Yeah, the STS, the Vital Safety TSR server. This is an acronym that is already built by another acronym. The T in the STS, Safety TSR server, is already the abbreviation of the acronym TSR, temporary speed restrictions. Why is that so important? Because the temporary speed restrictions can be implemented via the server. So the dispatchers can just specify the temporary speed restrictions in the server. Then it is fed into the system and also shown to the engineer on the speed display unit, just as any other speed limit. So the temporary speed restrictions come into the server here. That is the core of the whole system, and that is connected to all the wayside interface units and so to all the controllers in the network. This thing is also connected to an office communications manager, which is more or less the thing for the office segment, what the base communications manager is for the wayside units. That is connected with the radio net again. The legacy train dispatch system, computer-aided train dispatch and management system, is also connected to the system, the TMAC system for New Jersey Transit, so that the system can be used in connection with the ASES II infrastructure. There is also a network server that is called the data and maintenance service that logs what is happening in the system and can provide dumps of that, and also organizes the Ethernet-based communication and provides the interface for the IETMS back office server. The thing is, we've always talked about our trains using ASES II as the PTC on most northeast corridor lines. But the thing is that there are also a lot of freight carriers running their trains, and the freight carriers typically do not use ASES or ASES, but they use a communication-based system, IETMS. We have talked about this in a bit of a hypothetical way on the Antelope Valley line, I think. Hypothetically, because it is not implemented in the game, and there is little hope that it will be implemented soon, I think. Nevertheless, the point is, because those tracks are not only used by the passenger trains run by NJ Transit, run by Amtrak, run by MBTA, but also by those freight carriers, and so you typically have to have both safety systems running parallel. The ASES system and the IETMS system running parallel, and those two systems needs to be interconnected somehow. Whether this all makes sense and if it wasn't better to run all the trains on IETMS only is a different question, but this is not for me to decide. At any rate, you can find in those descriptions, like if you want to look it up, I gave you the relevant data here, the positive train control development plan and the positive train control implementation plan from 12 and 20 by New Jersey Transit, and then the type approval by the FRA for the ASES II system with a docket number here. You can find it at the FRA regulations web page if you want to read it up. It's a lot of stuff. I read it up yesterday and read through long documents to extract the information that I'm trying to give you in this video today. But if you want to read it up and check whether I got something wrong, then you can read this and check for yourself. And there you can find that they always have to make sure that both lines are interoperable with IETMS secured trains and ASES II secured trains on the same tracks. The locomotive then needs a computer that can communicate with the rest of the system. That is called an onboard computer. For the ASES II system, most of the stuff is produced by Alstom. Also, the Alstom onboard computer that is connected with a mobile communications manager. So that is the equivalent for the office communications manager and the base communications manager here. And this is also connected with an MDSTD 2020 radio system, what uses a standard established by Amtrak on the 220 megahertz spectrum. And so you have a radio network of that kind between the interlocking controllers, between the dispatcher's office, and between the engineer on the train, always in connection. It can obviously sometimes be problems with the communication, but in general, all those three should be connected in this radio system together. The safety critical information for the line speed enforcement and the positive train stop is not solely communicated on the radio network, but as a main stock is sent in by the track-mounted passive transponders, what would be often called balises in different systems. In the ASES II system, they are typically called balises. Here in those documents, they are simply called, without an acronym, interestingly, track-mounted passive transponders. Passive transponders because they just sit there in their track, and then they are kicked by the sweep frequency from the reader on the train, and then they send back their telegram saying, "Hello, I am transponder number so-and-so, and I have the following information for you. You will encounter a reduction in line speed limit to 60 in so-and-so many yards," and so on, and so on, and so on. The gradient will be, and the next transponder you will find in exactly 6 miles. For that, you need an item that is often referred to as the CTV box. And this is the device that can sport the transponder antenna and read those transponders. In the description of the ASES system, those are the frequencies that given their sweep frequency, so the train sends a sweep frequency, and then the transponders send back on a different frequency their data telegram. If those frequencies are also true for the ASES system, I don't know, probably they are, because the train does not know really whether they are on an ASES II NJ transit controlled track or maybe on an Amtrak track. So it would be actually helpful to use the same frequency, but I cannot put my hand in the fire for that. The speed display unit is that thing that we have discussed already. This is where the onboard computer communicates with the engineer, and obviously all this stuff is put together on an Ethernet bus on the locomotive. Also a speed sensor that more or less counts how many times the wheels have turned since the last transponder contact, and calculates how far we must have traveled. And as soon as we know how far we must have traveled, we know where we are. Accounting for wheel slips and other stuff, sometimes you have transponders to re-establish and correct those thingies and the position of the train. And the train needs to know where it is to calculate the brake profiles properly. And then we need an interface to the train systems, especially the brake system, so that the onboard computer can initiate a penalty brake if it deems right. So if any condition happens that stuff does not work as it is supposed to work, then this interface can initiate a penalty brake. If you are too fast, if there is improper input from the engineer, if there is missing input from the engineer, if the calculations that the computer does is improbable. Computer works on a 2 out of 3 basis from what you can read, so that you have actually 3 separated commuting alleys, and for the data to be considered valid, at least 2 of those computing alleys need to come up with the same result. So if you have different outcomes on the 3 computing alleys, then this outcome will not be considered as valid. So to provide extra safety here. And to know what went wrong, if something goes wrong, you have a chair, a crash-hardened event recorder system. It is not crash-hardened because it has been crashed before, but it is crash-hardened for the event of a crash, so that you can actually see, like in a black box or orange box on a plane, what made the train crash and what went wrong in the system. A specific of the ASES system that is not in the ASES system is that those wayside interface units actually provide, or at least this is in the description, I don't know if it has actually been implemented, that for a rail worker protection there can be a personal remote terminal for the rail workers there. It is not really clear what it does, but it should provide a communication interface for the rail workers on the track and the dispatcher, engineer, or whoever who might be in this communication. So this PRT is something that only the ASES II system provides. It is not, according to those documents, in the ASES system. Yeah, let's round it up. You have, like typical in systems of that kind, you have a wayside segment, you have an office segment, you have a locomotive segment, and connecting those three you have a communication segment on radio and on Ethernet-based cable networks. So now we know how technically the system works. Now let's see how it looks on our speed display unit. How does the system manage permanent speed restrictions? Quite simply, our train is running here, picking up a high clear signal all along the way. Those are the next track circuits, and all the time we are getting high greens. That means no restricting aspects on the signals. We can run on maximum authorized speed, so that any limit that we get is track limit, and this track limit is as a permanent speed restriction enforced by the ASES II system. So let's say the limit is 80 here. This is why we get shown the 80 limit here on our circle of light. And then the train encounters transponders, and the transponders say, hello, my name is transponder so and so. You will encounter a limit to 60 miles per hour at XXX feet, and at YYY feet the limit will increase to 70 miles per hour again. And then after 3.5 miles you will get the next pair of transponders. Here we can already see them. This is what more or less the transponder tells the train, and the train knows, all right, I will be running into a limit from 80 to 60 in at this point in so and so many feet. Let's say this is XXX feet. What does the train do now in preparation for those two marks? For the drop from 80 to 60, it calculates a speed profile. According to what type of train it is, how good the brakes are, and other parameters that need to be set in advance. And then at a certain point, as soon as we hit this brake profile here, we get this boop, this slightly lower tone from the ASES system, and shortly after we will see this bar shrink if we have not already lowered our speed to the new limit at this point. If we are already at 60 when we hit the brake profile, then typically this circle of light just snaps from 80 to 60. We still have to acknowledge it. We will get an alarm for it, but we won't see it shrink. This is at least what the system is supposed to work. Yeah, and then it shrinks until we get to the point. And what does the train do? On top of it, it does not only calculate the speed curve from 80 to 60, but it also calculates an alert curve where the train thinks that it should alert the engineer that now is the point where you should really activate the brakes. And on top of that, a brake profile where the train, the point is where the train thinks, okay, there is no point in alerting the engineer. I have to initiate the brakes myself. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it to the 60 at XXX feet. So we have seen this in a lot of systems. We calculate a speed line and we enforce it not in a very stringent manner. As soon as we violate the speed line, we get a penalty brake. No, we have two steps actually. One step, alert, so that the engineer can still apply the brakes themselves, and above that, if it gets more problematic, at some point the train has to activate the brakes automatically, and that will be the brake profile. If you just do what you're supposed to do and keep the speed below this line here, then you will end up with the speed at 60 at this point, and all is good. You will then get a beep as soon as you hit this point here, XXX feet, where the limit actually changes. You have to acknowledge it. If you don't acknowledge it, then you might get a penalty brake. We will see that in a second. If you are still too fast, like 78, then as an overspeed indicator, you will get this yellow, this red dot underneath the speed indication in the middle of your SDU, telling you that this speed of 78 that you are traveling is too high and you have to lower it. And then you get this really spacey alarm of pew, wee, wee, wee. That can really get you out of your slumber if you get into it, and then you have to jam in the brakes to suppression, and then the alarm will go off, not necessarily a penalty brake that has been initiated by then. So, what are the conditions for initiating a penalty brake? Failure to acknowledge the speed change within 8 seconds after the beep, after the XXX point. Even if you are traveling already 60 and you fail to acknowledge within 8 seconds, then the train will initiate a penalty brake. If you are above the alert profile for longer or for at least 8 seconds without putting the brakes in suppression, and you can see it on your speed clock with this yellow bar with suppression, if you have sufficiently applied the brakes, what is typically on most trains at around 70 or 80%, or a reduction of 15 psi, then you will get suppression, and then the train will not initiate a penalty brake, but then it is typically enough that you can slow down sufficiently to make the speed limit. If you exceed the brake profile, then you don't have any time, then it's not 8 seconds and there is no acknowledge, then you will get the penalty brake immediately. And the penalty brake will only be releasable as a running release as soon as you are under the speed line and typically under the targeted speed, and then you can release it. If the penalty brake is already on, acknowledging can turn off the annoying alarm, but will not turn off the penalty brake until you're actually below the target speed. That is for drops in speed limit. If the speed limit increases again, then your circle of light will just jump from 60 to 70, and you will get a confirming beep that you don't need to acknowledge, just so that you see that something happened on your SDU, and then it is your responsibility to calculate that the train has run its length before you accelerate. This is nothing that the ASES system will do for you, or the ASES system will do for you. This is something that you have to know yourself, how long your train is, and not accelerate before you have traveled the whole length of the train. What happens then outside of those target speed situations? We have the speed like 70 here then, and above that the train has 2 steps of intervening. 3 miles above that speed line you will get the alarm again, hit the alert profile, and 6 miles above you will get into the brake profile and get the penalty brake immediately. This is for not approaching a drop in speed limit, but this is the constant speed limit. In ETCS terms, you would say this is a ceiling speed control. This is a target speed control. Here It is not necessarily 3 or 6 miles above. This depends on the calculation of the alert profile and the brake profile that convene together at the point where the limit actually changes. But if you are running in a static speed limit, then you have the 3 miles and 6 miles per hour above the controlled speed before you get an alarm and before you get a penalty brake. Activation. And this happens more or less the same with temporary speed restrictions. Only that obviously you cannot code in the temporary speed restrictions in your permanent track mounted passive responders, because otherwise you would just have to travel there and change the data input of those transponders. So the temporary speed restrictions are typically sent into the train by radio from the wayside stations that can communicate with the train. The TSR server sends it through the network, and then on the radio network the train gets, typically for 3 blocks ahead, the information about incoming temporary speed restrictions, and then they are enforced the same way that the permanent speed restrictions are enforced, with the difference that they don't get into the train by the track mounted balises or transponders, but typically by radio. If it does not work with radio, there is also the possibility as a backup system to throw temporary transponders on the track that give the information to the train about temporary speed restrictions, but typically the idea is to send them into the train by radio. And obviously, the information that the TSR server has about the gradient and the grid in the network and the temporary speed restrictions needs to be accurate. Otherwise, the whole system does not really work properly. All right. What does it look like on our STU? We typically have the circle of light. You might have noticed that so far I have skipped this little yellow part, actually. I think that as long as you are not approaching a speed limit, this little yellow corner of the end of your circle of light indicates the difference between the actual speed limit and the alert curve. So this is maybe those 3 miles per hour gap that you have. So that relevant is actually here, the point where it is full green, and if you exceed the point where the yellow ends, then you will get the alarm. If you approach a target, a speed target in a drop in a line speed, then I would actually have expected for the yellow thing to look like this. So like if it drops from 45 to 30, then I would have thought maybe we get this shown in a way that the yellow band actually enlarges, so that we know that we have to slow down to the point where it is full green again, like we know that from the ETCS cap signaling, for example. It seems to be like this in all the description of this STU. At least in the game, it does not work like this. You don't get this. This would actually be nice, so that you know how far you have to slow down, and then this whole thing could shrink until it is at the 30. It does not work like this, at least not in the game. It would be interesting to know if it is so in real life or whether this is just the implementation of the game. What happens in the game, you get a boop sound at some point when you hit the brake profile, and then the thing just shrinks until it is at the new speed limit. And then it beeps and you have to acknowledge it. What happens if you're actually traveling faster? Then you get the overspeed indicator. Then you get the difference here marked with red. And you get this basic BU, 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 BU alarm. And then you have to put your brakes into suppression and get the speed below the target. Acknowledge it, and then you can make a running release. So you got to put it into suppression. If you don't get it into suppression fast enough, you will get an overspeed penalty, just what we've seen in our run before, and then the train will slow down because of the penalty brake, and if it is slow enough, you can release the penalty brake again, put the brakes into suppression. If you are below target, then actually the red dot should disappear again, also the red fraction on the ray of light, and the alarm should go off, and the overspeed penalty indicator should go off, and finally also the suppression indicator should go off. And then after this running release, you should be back on track. So better than the PCB system that actually stops the train, and then the train is standing around on sand somewhere on the track and being an obstacle. So here you can totally perform a running release and all is good. Yeah, interestingly enough, in the development plan and the implementation plan, those SDU was celebrated as something unique to the ASES II system of New Jersey Transit, built according to look and feel that is most intuitive for the engineer, having a number pad that does not appear in the game implementation anymore, showing both speeds for the SES and the CSS, what does not happen here, showing the circle of light in two ways, a bit like the British automatic train protection system that you can find on the trains running on the Great Western lines out of Paddington, with a lot of indicators in the middle, and this bar of light that indicates the distance to target. All those things don't feature in the implementation of the game. I don't know why. I have not found any change in the development or implementation plan that explains why the thing that we find in the game looks differently. So whether they just scrap this idea with the bar of light and the different speeds and yeah, the target speed indication here, and to make it more simple, I don't know. Here you would have this, what I thought actually would make sense to show how far you have to slow down. This is obviously the newer version of 2020. Here already the separate limits are no longer in the representation, but you have this CSS and SAS with the indication for commuter trains that we now see in the game implementation. It looks a bit more like it, but still has the bar of light as distance to target, and has this indicator here. No longer the different lamps like on the Great Western Railway trains, but now built the way that we see it here in the game. Also, the keypad vanished for whatever reason. The CSS and non-CSS switch is still there. This is used if you are actually running on ASES, but no longer on coded cap signals. So it's a territory where you have the ASES system running, but no coded cap signals. For whatever reason, then you can move the switch to non-CSS, and then you can actually go faster than the 20 that the restricting aspects for a 0 pulse signal would allow you. Switching this switch to non-CSS and still receiving a code would result in an immediate penalty brake application. Typically it doesn't in the game from what I have seen, but this is how the system is described, because then movement of the switch would actually be faulty. Yeah, target speed. This is what I thought should actually happen, but it doesn't. With us, it looks like this, as we have discussed. Last thing to discuss is actually the positive train stop implementation. So what is that? Let's say we're approaching a junction with a red signal, control signal. So this is a stop and stay signal. Typically, the signaling sequence is more or less like at least an advance, maybe an approach signal at this point, maybe before that an advance approach, or an advance medium, or advanced limited or whatever you might get in your signaling sequence. At this point, an approach signal. Typically, transponders here, you would be in the track circuit before the approach signal, still running with an approach limited 45 indication on your SDU. Passing the approach signal, the cap signaling aspect would downgrade to approach 30 at this point. At this point, halfway up to the red signal, typically it would switch to restricting 20. And then if you only rely on the coded cap signals, you would be controlled to 20 forever on, and you could pass the red signal without the train intervening. So you can pass the red signal with 20 and do whatever harm or havoc you can actually do with your 20 miles per hour past this junction. So this is why we need a positive train stop implementation. The transponders tell the train that there is a stop indication, a 0 mile per hour point at so and so many feet, and then the train calculates again an alert curve and a brake curve, or alert profile and a brake profile, and it is set in those documents that the idea is to bring the train to a stop at a point 100 feet before the signal, so that a spat is actually not possible in the system. And for that, we introduce a cap signal aspect that does not come from the coded track circuits, but that comes from the train stop feature in the ASES system, because the train got the message a stop in so and so many feet, and then after the train knows I'm so close to the signal, now I have to actually enforce a stop 100 feet before the signal, and then you will get the double yellow, the double red on the ADU, and probably you will get this speed. Maybe it also shows you a higher release speed at this point. I'm not entirely sure what it is supposed to show at this point, but at 100 feet before the signal, your train should have come to a stop. And this is the positive train stop feature. You get a penalty brake if you get beyond the brake profile at this point. What actually happens if you only go beyond the alert curve, this is a bit difficult to see. I'm not entirely sure if the implementation in the game is very coherent there. Sometimes it seems to cut you and stop you short even before the specified stopping point for your train, and you can't get closer to the signal with this positive train stop on. Yeah, how do you release that whole thing again? As soon as the cap signaling aspect actually switches to better than restricting, that would be a high green, an approach limited, or an approach aspect typically. As soon as the train is drawing a pulse code again, meaning that the signal switched, then the train knows, okay, the signal cleared, I can release that positive train stop, and then you can go on. It is also possible to radio release the train, to send a radio signal to the train that it is allowed to clear the signal. That is possible in situation where you are still approaching a restricting signal, but you can pass the signal. Here the cap aspect obviously wouldn't clear to better than restricting, but still you can go on and clear the signal that is now showing a restricting aspect. You can find a provision that it is also possible to send the engineer a uniquely and randomly generated code that they have to punch into the keyboard to override this positive train stop. Now that the keyboard vanished, I don't know what happened with this. And positive train stop override button that you can find in the MBTA locomotives that allow you to pass the signal and limit you to 15 miles per hour. I don't think that the New Jersey Transit locomotives have that, and if they have that the engineers are allowed to use it. At least I have not found any mentioning of a button of that kind in the development and implementation plan. Maybe it is in the operating rules or somewhere. At any rate, I cannot tell you. How do I release penalty brakes otherwise? Throttle to idle, air brake to suppression or higher. If there is no suppression, like on the ALP 46, then put into emergency, and then acknowledge if you still have to acknowledge, and then you can release. This positive train stop, where you punch in a 0 miles per hour point that is controlled, can also be used for civil limits at interlocking permanent speed restrictions, or on diverging tracks, that is then called route dependent PSR. That means if the train is diverging here through the switch and is limited to whatever 30 when it goes across the switch instead of 60 that the junction typically shows, then if you're coming in with whatever 79, typically junction speed would be 60. If you go straight ahead, then the 0 mile per hour and this point would be surrogated by the interlocking speed with the 60 miles per hour. And if the switch is actually set to the diverging track, route dependent PSR, then you can also replace it with the 30 miles per hour. So you can also control the diverging routes with positive train stop. You can also protect stop and proceed signals and automatic block signals with the positive train stop, and you can protect failed grade crossings. It is possible for the dispatcher to set 0 miles per hour temporary speed restrictions somewhere, and then the system will not allow the train to pass that point. So it is very versatile and can be used in a lot of situations. In the game, you can often see it at the end of your run, and then it seems to be a bit overprotective, because typically it will stop you short before you even reach the stop marker at the position at the platform where you want to end up. So I'm not entirely sure if that is implemented correctly, or whether we are just going too fast along the platform to comply with this. That is what I wanted to tell you, I think, about the ASES II system. And now we have talked about the signaling New Jersey Transit is using on the Morristown Line. We have talked about the cab signaling system and the ATC system that is connected with the cab signaling system. And now we have, in the third part, covered the ASES II system that is very close to the ASES II system, with some similarities, with some variations and a lot of similarities, and how it works with our specific SDU. And now we can go on with our train. We will run into a limit to 60 soon. Let's see if we can drop it to 60 before we get to this point, and see what the system does. If we actually get to the reduction point. Now we see it shrinking anyway. From the description in the plans, it actually should drop immediately. But whatever. At any rate, it is possible to stay below. Now we're dropping to 50. Increase to 70 again. Until we get to Chatham. And Chatham we will get a drop to whatever, 55 I think. That was not Chatham yet, right? Was it? Nah, it's Madison first. So we still actually have to go a bit until we have to slow down to 55. High greens. Also nice on those non-revenue services is that you don't get a lot of adverse signals typically. So that you can really see those changes in line speed. Not overlaid. Sometime when approaching Summit we should get a drop to 50. Most of the time when you're driving normal revenue services, you would slow down when approaching Summit, because typically you get stop signals at Summit, so you don't see the drop to 50 here in line speed. Further on we will have a further drop in line speed when going through Summit Station. Signals are hard to read, but I think we have a high green. Can run on a high green through Summit Station. Usually does not work. And CDRajdar put into the chat that he just found out that he followed this channel here on January the 2nd in the year 2023. So this is actually your anniversary, and it is the 3rd anniversary already. That is really great. I'm so happy to have you on the channel and as a moderator. For 3 years running, that is amazing. Never miss any stream, I believe. That is really amazing, CDRajdar. We have to think of something special for the release of the Czech route. And Akura says at CDRajdar, man, that's sick in a positive way. It is really bombastic. Yeah. I most vividly remember talking to you for the first time on the chat when I was driving a train from Sursee back to Luzern, and you said that you would especially were looking forward to the ETCS discussion. That at the time was only in the Luzern Sursee, and we did not have it on SimRail, obviously. So we are almost down our hill. And CDRajdar says he remembers when there was one of the first ETCS streams and I was in Amsterdam and I was rushing to the hotel to catch it, but the metro somehow broke down and I waited for many minutes for the next one, and then I was like, oh, that's bombastic. If you're a metro driver and then the metro in a different city breaks down and leaves you hanging in the air. So we have managed it down the hill. Now this is Maplewood, right? Let's check. No, Millburn. Maplewood is next. There are so many stations that start with an M. And past Millburn we actually should get an increase in speed limit again. Here it is, to 60. Now getting to the orange area. Speed limit of 60 was announced. A temporary speed restriction to 60. So this is why I'm not accelerating. Even though the speed limit climbed to 70. Let's see if we can see it on the preview. Here. Wow. It is announced in like more than 2 miles ahead. Interesting. Well, and I can accelerate still. That is sometimes a bit awkward with those temporary speed restrictions in the game. A drop of 10 miles per hour from 70 to 60 is announced with a warning distance of more than 2 miles. But let's see whether the ASES system is enforcing it. I hope it will. Here's a phase gap first. A neutral section. Now it is enforced. Our slowdown to 60, and here is the S board for the start, and here is the R board for the end of the speed restriction. A temporary one, so we can confirm ASES II is enforcing temporary speed restrictions in the game. For a bit we can accelerate to 70, but as soon as we are going around the corner past Highland Avenue towards Orange, We will have to slow down again. Limit to 60 for orange, respectively for the bend here. Actually, I don't need to blow the horn probably because we need to. There is a platform directly next to us. Brick Church, if I'm not mistaken. And then East Orange, and then the Roosevelt Trench, and then we are already approaching Newark. Now we got a traffic-related drop in signal speed to approach limited 45. Afterwards it cleared again, back to line speed 60. This is East Orange if I'm not mistaken. That means we are approaching the junction with the Montclair line again. Into Roosevelt Trench. Signals are incoming, approach limited. So those overspeed conditions are not ASES related but ATC related. At the junction area we'll have a line speed limit to 35. That is most probably beginning here. We can't see it because Oh my god, I was just muted. I was telling you stuff and stuff and stuff and stuff. No, I actually muted my headset because I needed to cough. And I did not want to blow up your ears, so... all the explanation went into the void. I'm sorry for that. Yeah. Approach slow. Or was it already the slow clear? At any rate, we got a restricting aspect here. For the entrance into Bergen Tunnel. Where is the service text? Well, I did not manage to put up the service text. I meant to do it, but I was too late actually. Well, you have 2 miles to say it again. Yeah, what actually was lost in the void is that approaching the bridge, you could see how first the ASES II limit dropped, and then it was overtaken by the signal aspect decreasing. So it jumped to 45, and after the brake profile caught up again, then it shrunk to 30. And I said it is a good idea actually that people will buy the whole game maybe on a sale just for the Czech DLC. Get a lot of interesting content. And the Czech DLC, obviously. Here are those special signals that look like dwarf signals, but they function as high signals. This is why the single green lamp is a high green, giving you a full clear, and not a slow clear, limiting to you to 15. This is why we can go the full line speed of 30 in the tunnel and don't need to slow down to 15. The slowdown was just for the switches before the tunnel. Same for those signals here. And feel free to poke me earlier if you have the impression that I am actually muted without wanting to be muted. So, next signal is actually a dwarf signal, showing us the double green aspect. What is a high green? For dwarf signals, allowing us to go line speed. So we can go on with 30. Approach medium. This will not limit us anymore. Just dropping the cap signaling aspect to approach limited 45 on a 30 miles track limit. This does not provide a more restricting limit. Now we get an approach slow. That also translates into 30 limit. But it also means that at the next signal we have to be down to 15. But we won't be controlled to, or we have to do on our own. But we can see that the access limit's actually slowing down to 15.
When leaving the train, please watch the gas.
So the slow clear here could only be controlled with a limit of 20 with the restricting aspect, but with the ASES system we can also control the 15. But soon we will reach a point where the ASES system is no longer implemented in the terminus area, and you can see that our circle of light will jump from 15 to a higher limit here. And now we are only controlled with the cab signal aspect of 20, even though the limit is 15. But now we are outside of ASES control territory and have to make sure that we don't run through the buffer block at the end of the platform here. Actually, we are quite early with our non-revenue service. Why they do those non-revenue services, taking back the trains empty from Dover to Hoboken, I don't know. Maybe because they need in the evening more trains running out of Hoboken than into Hoboken. No positive train stop here, even though we are approaching a red lamp. And here we are.
This station stop is Hoboken.
The beautiful Hoboken Terminal. And here we are. Yes, one instance of speeding when I wanted to showcase the wow spacey alarm of ASES. The rest was as it was supposed to be. I enjoyed the run. I always love those non-revenue services where you run the whole line without stopping on your typically passenger trains. Guys, that was the third video about New Jersey Transit. We covered signaling, we covered the cab signaling and the associated speed control system, and now also the ASES II system. Tomorrow I am going to try to start my YouTube Shorts signaling tutorial course in the beta form. If you have any feedback, please don't hold back. I'm just trying out whether this works or not. I'm planning on releasing one short every day at around 1900 UTC, 8 o'clock Central European time. If you let me know what you think of it and if it makes any sense to pursue this further, just let me know. So far, Happy New Year again. Thanks so much for your ongoing support. CDRajdar, happy anniversary. So happy to have you. Aqua, so happy to have you as well. AJ, good night if you're not already asleep. And everybody else who did not appear on the chat but is still in the audience. Thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel. See you soon, most probably next Sunday. Good night.